I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't want one. When my brother showed up at my office door on a Thursday afternoon in November, the kind of gray, wet November that settles over Vancouver like a lid, I didn't feel anything dramatic. No rush of old anger. No surge of satisfaction. I just looked at him through the glass panel beside my door, at how his hairline had receded and how he was holding his hat in both hands like a man who knew he was about to ask for something he hadn't earned. And I thought, so this is what 18 years looks like on him. I told my assistant to give me 5 minutes. I wasn't being cruel. I just needed to remember who I was before I opened that door. Because there was a version of me. The 22-year-old version. The one standing on the front porch of our parents' house in Kelowna with a single duffel bag and the keys to a car that wasn't even fully mine. Who would have let him in before he knocked? That version of me is gone. It took a long time to stop grieving her. My parents built their life around appearances. That's the most honest way I can say it. My father spent 30 years as a commercial real estate developer in the Okanagan, which in that part of British Columbia means you are never just selling buildings. You are selling the idea of yourself as a man who builds things. My mother ran the social infrastructure that kept his reputation standing. The charity galas, the wine country dinners, the careful management of which neighbors got invited in and which ones got waved at from the driveway. I was the eldest. My brother Theodore, Theo, everyone called him, was 4 years younger and, from the time he was about 12, he was the one they talked about at dinner. His hockey, his marks, his potential. I was the one who set the table and cleared it. That's not self-pity. That's just what the architecture of that family looked like from the inside. I didn't hate my childhood. There were good years. Summers at Okanagan Lake. My mother teaching me to make her shortbread at Christmas. A father who, when he wasn't performing, could be funny and warm and genuinely interested in what you had to say. The problem wasn't that there was no love. The problem was what happened when love ran up against money. My grandmother, my mother's mother, passed when I was 21. She was the kind of woman who kept a garden and never raised her voice and somehow made you feel more seen than anyone who shouted ever could. She left me her house, not the whole estate. She had other grandchildren, other bequests, but the house she'd lived in for 40 years, a 3-bedroom in East Kelowna with a cherry orchard out back, and a mortgage that had been paid off since 1987. She left it to me specifically by name, in a will she had drawn up with a lawyer in Penticton. I had known since I was 17 that she intended to do this. She told me herself, the summer she was diagnosed, sitting on her back porch with iced tea and a sound of sprinklers in the neighbor's yard. She said, I want you to have something that's yours, something no one can ask you to share. She knew my family. She knew them better than I understood at the time. My grandmother passed in March. By June, my father had a plan. The plan, as I eventually pieced it together, was this. Sell the East Kelowna house, fold the proceeds into a development project my father was assembling outside of West Kelowna. A mixed-use residential thing. The kind of project that sounds solid until you look at the financing. And in exchange, I would be given a share of the eventual profits that would be worth more than the house. This was presented to me at a family dinner as though it were a generous offer. My mother refilled the wine glasses. My brother nodded like a man who'd already heard the pitch. I said no. I said no politely the first time. I said my grandmother had left me that house for a reason, and I intended to honor that. My father said I was being sentimental. My mother said I was being difficult. Theo said nothing, which should have told me something. I said no again the next week when my father called. I said no a third time when they showed up at my apartment in Kelowna. I had been renting a 1-bedroom near the college where I was finishing my accounting degree, and my father sat on my couch and told me that the family needed me to be practical, that this was a real opportunity, that I was being selfish. He used the word selfish about my grandmother's house, the one she left to me because she wanted me to have something that was mine. I still think about that sometimes. The specific audacity of it. The 4th time I said no, my father told me that if I wasn't willing to be part of this family's future, then I could figure out my own. Those were close to his exact words. My mother was standing behind him. She didn't contradict him. Theo was not there. He'd wisely stayed in Penticton that weekend. I moved out of my apartment at the end of the month, not because they'd taken anything from me. They hadn't, legally. The house was mine. I kept it. But I could not stay in that city and breathe the same air as people who had looked at my grandmother's dying wish and seen a line item. I deferred my final semester, packed my car with what mattered, and drove west on the Coquihalla in early September with the mountains on all sides and the peculiar calm that comes when you've made a decision you know is right, even though it's also terrible. I cried somewhere around Hope. Then I stopped. Vancouver in your early 20s with no job and a completed almost accounting degree, and the stubbornness not to call home is a specific kind of hard. I want to be accurate about this because I've noticed that certain kinds of stories flatten the difficult years into a montage, a few shots of someone looking tired, then a cut to success. My difficult years were not a montage. They were rent that was too high and roommates who ate my food and a 6-month stretch working at a hotel in Gastown doing night audit, which is exactly what it sounds like. You sit alone in a quiet lobby from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. And you reconcile the day's accounts and you answer the phone when guests call down to complain about the ice machine. I was good at it. That surprised me a little. I had always been reasonably good with numbers. My grandmother had noticed it before my parents did. But in that hotel lobby, working through the night with a lukewarm Tim Hortons and spreadsheets that other people had made a mess of, I found out I was more than reasonably good. I was meticulous. I caught errors that the day staff missed. I started understanding not just what the numbers said, but why they said it, what behavior they were reflecting, where the gaps were between what a business thought it was doing and what it was actually doing and what it was actually doing. I finished my degree through correspondence. It took me an extra year. I wrote the CPA exams in a borrowed suit borrowed from a roommate who was slightly taller than me, and I passed all of them on the first attempt. By the time I was 27, I was working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Yaletown. By 29, I was a senior accountant. By 31, I had 3 private clients who paid me more per quarter than my hotel job had paid in a year. By 33, I had 11. I did not become a millionaire. I want to be careful here because these stories sometimes get inflated into something cinematic, and my life is not cinematic, it's just mine. What I became was financially independent in a way that felt solid and real. I owned a condo in Mount Pleasant that I bought during a brief window. When that was possible for a single person with good credit and no help, I had a diversified TFSA and RRSP that my own clients would have approved of, and I had a small but genuine reputation in Vancouver's accounting community as someone you called when the numbers didn't add up, and you needed to know why. My grandmother's house I kept. I rented it out through a property manager. Every quarter, the rental income landed in an account I had named in my banking app after her. I did not speak to my parents for 11 years, not out of drama. I didn't send a letter, I didn't make a speech. I just stopped calling. They called twice in the first year. My mother left a voicemail at Christmas that I listened to 3 times and did not return. After that, the calls stopped. We had, by mutual exhaustion, let the relationship end. Theo I heard about occasionally through a cousin who stayed in touch with both sides without taking sides, which I respected even when it frustrated me. He had gone into my father's business. Of course he had. He was doing fine, the cousin said. Then he was doing not so fine. Then, for a while, he was doing well again. I didn't ask for details. It wasn't my life. The Thursday he came to my office, I had been back from a client meeting for about 40 minutes and I was eating a sandwich at my desk, which is not how I prefer to eat lunch, but the meeting had run long. My assistant knocked and said there was a man asking to see me, said he was my brother, said he didn't have an appointment. I looked up. Does he know I don't do walk-ins? I told him. He said he'd wait. I put down the sandwich. I thought about what it meant that he'd driven from the Okanagan, and I was certain he'd driven. Theo has never liked flying, to stand in the lobby of my office building in Vancouver without calling first. People who show up without calling are either in genuine crisis or they've calculated that advance warning gives you time to say no. With Theo, it could have been either. I told her to send him in. He looked older. Of course he did, we both did, But on him it landed differently. There were lines around his eyes that I recognized as stress lines, not laugh lines. He was wearing a good jacket, but it was slightly too big, the way clothes fit when you've lost weight recently and haven't gotten around to replacing things. He sat down across from me without being invited, then seemed to realize that and looked briefly uncomfortable. "You look good," he said. "Thank you." Silence. I should have called. "You should have," I agreed. He turned his hat in his hands. He brought a wool cap, it was November, and he looked at the windows behind me, at the gray sky over the city, and then he looked at me and said, "Dad's company is in receivership." I waited. Has been for about 7 months. The West Kelowna project, and 2 others. There were tax issues. Revenue Canada got involved. It's bad, Rosalie. It's really bad. Rosalie. He hadn't said my name in 11 years, and hearing it in his voice in this room felt strange, like a piece of furniture from childhood showing up in the wrong house. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was in a distant, factual way. I don't wish ruin on people, even people who've earned it. Mom and Dad have lost the house. They're staying with Dad's sister in West Kelowna right now. It's not good. He paused. They're the ones who asked me to come. There it was. They're asking, Theo said carefully, if there's anything you can do, professionally, or otherwise. I looked at him for a long moment. He met my eyes, then looked away, then made himself look back. Give him this. He wasn't pretending it wasn't what it was. They want financial help, I said. And maybe some advice. You know people. You understand this kind of. Theo. I said it quietly, not harshly. Walk me through something. When our grandmother left me her house and Dad wanted me to sign it over for his project, and I said no, and they told me I could figure out my own future. Do you remember that? A muscle moved in his jaw. Yes. Did you disagree with what they did? A long pause. I didn't say anything. That's what I remember too. He nodded slowly. Outside, a seagull crossed the window. We were 15 floors up, and I never get tired of watching the birds move at that height. How purposeful they look, going somewhere. I'm not going to pretend I handled everything right, he said finally. I was 22. I didn't want to blow up the family. I thought maybe you'd come back and it would, I don't know, sort itself out. It sorted itself out, I said, just not the way anyone planned. He almost smiled. It was a sad smile, and for a second I could see the brother I had when we were young, before the family's particular gravity had pulled us into different orbits. I can't help them financially, I said. I want to be honest with you about that. Not because I don't have resources, I have some, but because giving money into that situation wouldn't actually help. If Revenue Canada is involved and the company is in receivership, there are processes. Throwing personal funds at it generally makes things worse and can create liability for the person doing the throwing. That's not an excuse. That's just true. He absorbed this. What I can do, I said, is give you the name of a trustee I respect, someone who deals with insolvency, who's honest, and who will tell your parents exactly where things stand and what options exist. That's real help. That's more useful than money. Theo looked at me. That's it? That's what I have. Another silence. He put his hat on his knee. They're going to want to know if there's any chance of you being more involved. With the family. Going forward. I thought about my grandmother's back porch, the iced tea, the sprinklers. I want you to have something that's yours, something no one can ask you to share. I don't have anger toward them anymore, I said. And this was true. I had worked a long time to make it true. But I also don't have a debt to them. They made a choice 18 years ago. I made mine. Those choices had consequences for all of us, and the consequences aren't reversible just because the circumstances changed. So no. He stood up. He was taller than me by a few inches, always had been, and standing up he seemed to realize this and somehow tried to make himself smaller. The way people do when they know they're not in a position to use height as anything. He put his hat back on. For what it's worth, he said at the door. I thought about calling you a lot over the years. Not for this. Just, I thought about it. I thought about it too, I said. I'm sorry we didn't. And I meant that. I did. Because the grief of it, not the anger, the grief, is that there was a real brother in there somewhere, under all the dynamics and the silence and the years. Maybe there still is. I don't know yet what to do with that. He left. I heard the elevator. I sat at my desk for a while and didn't eat the rest of my sandwich. I sent him the trustee's information that evening. A woman I'd worked with twice. Someone ethical and clear-eyed and genuinely good at explaining complicated situations to people who are frightened. I included a short note. This is the most useful thing I can offer. I hope it helps. He replied the next morning with 2 words. Thank you. That was 2 years ago now. My parents worked through the insolvency process. They lost what they lost. My cousin tells me they are living more quietly now, renting in Kelowna. My father doing some consulting. My mother apparently volunteering at a hospital auxiliary. I don't know if they are happy. I hope they are not suffering. I did not reach out to them directly. They did not reach out to me. My grandmother's house still stands in East Kelowna. The current tenants are a young couple with a dog and, apparently, a very enthusiastic approach to the garden. My property manager sends photos sometimes. The cherry trees are still there. They fruit every year whether anyone tends them or not, which has always struck me as exactly the right kind of stubborn. Some people ask me if I regret the distance, if I wish I had let it heal sooner, or differently, or at all. And I understand why they ask. It's a reasonable thing to wonder, especially if your own family wounds are the kind that did eventually close. Mine didn't close. They scarred. Scarred tissue is real tissue. It holds. It just doesn't feel the same as what was there before, and at some point you stop expecting it to. What I have instead, a life I built on ground that belonged to me, work I am genuinely good at, a city I chose. An account in my banking app named after a woman who believed, before anyone else did, that I deserved something no one could ask me to share. That turns out to be enough, more than enough. It turns out to be quite a lot. There's a cherry orchard in East Kelowna that fruits every year without being asked. No one tends it particularly well. The tenants let it do what it does. And every autumn the trees produce anyway, stubborn and indifferent, and completely unbothered by whether anyone is paying attention. I think about that orchard more than is probably rational. My grandmother understood something that took me a long time to articulate, that the choices we make about what we protect and what we refuse to hand over shape the kind of person we eventually become. She didn't leave me that house because she had no one else to give it to. She left it to me because she had watched quietly and carefully, and she had seen that I was the one who would hold it honestly. That kind of recognition is rare. It doesn't come from being the loudest or the most charming or the most accommodating. It comes from a consistency of character that other people observe long before you are aware of it yourself. What my father never understood, what I think genuinely didn't occur to him, is that the moment he sat on my couch and called me selfish for protecting what was legally and morally mine, he wasn't just making a financial argument, he was telling me exactly what I was worth to him. And that information, painful as it was the most clarifying thing that had ever happened to me. I stopped trying to earn something from people who had already told me, plainly, what they were willing to give. That's not bitterness, it's just paying attention. The version of me who drove west on the Coquihalla with a duffel bag and a half-finished degree was not equipped for what came next. She learned. She sat in a hotel lobby at 3 a.m., with bad coffee and other people's accounting errors, and she figured out not just the numbers, but the story the numbers were telling. That kind of intelligence, the kind that develops in the quiet, unglamorous hours when no one is watching, is the only kind that actually holds. You can't perform your way to it, you can't inherit it. You build it, slowly in the dark, because you have to. And the staying power required to do that, to not call home, to not ask for help from people who had proven they would use your need against you, to sit the CPA exams in a borrowed suit and pass them anyway. That's not stubbornness. It's something more deliberate than stubbornness. It's the decision, made over and over, that your own life is worth the effort of building correctly. When Theo sat across from me and said our parents needed help, I didn't feel triumph. I want to be honest about that because these stories are supposed to have a moment where everything reverses and the scales tip and the person who is wronged gets to feel large. I didn't feel large. I felt the specific sadness of watching consequences arrive that could have been avoided by better choices made years earlier. My father was a smart man who used his intelligence in service of short-term gains at the expense of people who trusted him. That kind of intelligence, turned inward and self-serving, eventually consumes the structure it was supposed to build. What I offered Theo, the trustee's name, the honest explanation, was not generosity dressed up as coldness. It was the most genuinely useful thing I had. I've spent my whole career understanding that real help looks like the truth clearly stated, not like money thrown into a situation that money alone can't fix. The orchard fruits, whether anyone tends it or not. I used to find that sad. Now I find it instructive. Some things, rooted in the right ground and left to grow honestly, simply do what they were always going to do. I think I am one of those things. I think my grandmother knew it before I did.